guys went looking for
Yeah,
Bill.
there were a couple guys that went looking for you, Bill.
I'll circle out there and send them.
And this is Ben, otherwise known as Frsky Steve and Frsky Ben on Facebook. Also, I'm starting the Frsky Steve channel on YouTube. So, a bunch of different training videos. Thanks everybody. Big enough. Where's everyone from before we get started?
Seattle.
Let's go out. Our distribution point for Frsky in North America. So, we pretty much, there's really isn't people quite like us elsewhere in the company. So we interface with the end users, and pretty much what I do is I go to events pretty much round the clock. Cool, thanks guys. Awesome, Ron's here.
Oh no.
Ron, I
You
love
followed
that.
me, didn't you?
That'd be negative.
Bull.
Take a seat. So yeah, I was just saying that we work for the actual manufacturers for Frsky, and so when we get feedback, it goes directly to management, and what we try to do is work on things as quickly as possible. What we're trying to do is make the best possible quality product. We do appreciate that you take your time and go out and fly with Frsky and tell your friends about it. And that's been a very positive impact for it. So whenever there's an issue, we take it very seriously. We try to find remedies for it. And we're trying to make things better all the time. Essentially what's happened, I'll let you speak in a second here, Ben.
No worries, be fine.
Is this, let me know.
No worries.
Yeah, I'm talking too much, just hit me. No, what's happened, Ethos is a ground up reboot. People ask, why are the radios so quick, so fast? Is it running an Android? No, it's written in C++. From the ground up, this was, at one point, the main core developer for OpenTX was asked, what do we do with OpenTX? Do we take it to the next generation and work with these new microcontrollers? The problem is the code base isn't gonna work. And he said, this thing is well, it needs a lot of work. And because it needs a lot of work, we need to start from the ground up. And what happened from that point on was we looked at Ethos as trying to measure up to OpenTX. We tried to make it as good as where we left off with OpenTX. And that has been the hardest thing for us to do. It's taken us about 2.5 years to get to this point right now, maybe a little bit longer. Mm-hmm. Yeah. But right now it is a very compelling operating system for the transmitters. What I will tell you about working with Ethos is this: we buy these radios, people get these things and they're like, I met these guys at an event and they said that they really like the radios, or they met Frsky Steve and he said, he sold me a radio. And I figured, what the hell? It's cheap enough, I'm gonna buy it, it looks great. And then about a week later, it's like, oh my God, I hate this effing thing. I want to destroy it with a hammer. I will ask my money back, but this thing is evil. Okay, all right, Jim. Okay, it's just like everybody, this feels just like school because
We're tardy.
I know.
Hey, Jim, what time do they start in Rhode Island?
5 minutes after you say they start.
Thanks for being late, guys. You're now the new ones that are buying drinks for everyone. It was me.
No, so, yeah, I was just saying, there's the 4 stages of Frsky. The first stage is cheap enough, I like it, looks like fun. Second stage is, I effing hate this thing. I would ask my money back, but knowing that someone else will buy it is bad enough. I need to destroy it with a hammer. Third week is, I'm starting to watch videos, I'm starting to understand it, I'm getting this now, it's actually kind of cool. And the fourth week is like you're at the flying field, showing everyone the radio, showing them what you can do with it, and you freaking love this thing.
I love this thing.
Yeah, so that's kind of it. What we want to do today is take you through the whole, more or less, I want to get people comfortable, not really so much with the finding things like every nitty-gritty detail, but I want to give people an overview of how the radio system works so that you have an opportunity to maybe understand the structure, the architecture of Ethos and get a little bit deeper into it.
So just a quick question, are you guys new to Frsky with the Ethos radio systems, or have any of you used our previous generation systems that were running OpenTX? Everybody's
OpenTX.
So we got a few OpenTX users. So, as Steve mentioned earlier, we've been spending a lot of time to bring Ethos up to what we call feature parity with OpenTX, so that basically every feature that you have in OpenTX is available in Ethos. With our latest version 1.5, we pretty much reached feature parity. The big thing that everybody was asking for was variables, global vars. They're a very powerful function in that you can, just like an algebra variable, you can have this X or Y condition where it can be adjusted by various programming on the radio, programming options. The most common programming thing that you're gonna wanna use it for is for like gain adjustments or trimming adjustments, things like that. So we've also added in a lot of new features with 1.5 that a lot of people are kind of holding off on updating, but you really kind of need to just look at what new features are available and whether it's worth it. If you used it in OpenTX, you would need to consider updating to the newest version so that you have those additional features that we've added in.
And then one of the first things we're gonna go into is fixing, because this is driving Cindy nuts, so I'm gonna go in and fix it right away. Let's get the lights off real quick. This is it. We're gonna start off with settings. So settings can either be SYS over here or this icon. This is only up in the main screen, the gear icon. And then the first thing I go into typically is when you have new radios to set it up. We can go into general. At the very bottom, let's just move this thing for a quick.
Maybe you have to push up on it, not down.
All right, at the very bottom, where you can't see right here, you have sleep mode brightness. We're gonna turn the sleep mode brightness. So this is the thing we're gonna do so that when it falls asleep, it's still not quite slipped in. And we wake up with keys. At the very bottom, people ask, how do you change this at the top right here? Because this is what default looks like.
And personally, I don't like the icons up at the top of the screen. To me, I don't really know what two battery bars mean. So one of the first things that we like to do with the radios is change them to be digital readings so that you get your actual voltage input, voltage for the radio, and then also the RSSI values for the radio.
We can close these things down.
So
What number is full voltage there?
it would be 8.4 volts, so it's a 2-cell battery.
All right.
What I've got.
So the first thing it shows this USB mode pre-selection. I usually go in here and I switch it over to Ethos Suite. What this means is when you plug the radio in, it will go right into Ethos Suite. Select model at power on, I find that really annoying.
That's a new feature with 1.5.
Right, so this is where you turn on the digital voltage. See at the top, there's a number right there. And then all of a sudden, this shows RS at the very top right here, it shows RSSI and everything else. So what's nice about this, you can close this down. Typically when people have an issue, it's with audio. And so voice 1 needs to be switched over to US. And that's kind of the main thing. What that is, that now it will recognize, if people say, oh, my voice has disappeared, it's usually there. You want to drop off all of your sound files into that directory. It's in audio, something. EN and then US, and then that's the place to put it into. All right. So the next thing what we do is to hit return, get out of here.
Can you explain the select model at power on? I mean,
Yeah, so that means when you power up your radio, it's gonna go right into the model select screen. So you can select the model you're gonna fly every time you put your radio on.
okay.
I also find that pretty annoying. I just like to, even if I'm not gonna fly the model that I had flown last time, I like to go into the model select and actually just move around because.
About the only other things I play with is, if you go back into here, date and time, I switch off the 24-hour time, and you put it onto that's a 12-hour time clock with AM and PM. You can leave the seconds on, I usually put the date in, and that's about it. Anything else you would add on that screen?
Not on the date and time screen, but back on the general screen.
Okay.
One of the things that I like to change on the radio is the audio, so scroll down a little bit more.
I'll do that, I'm trying to close this down.
So when you first get the radios, the audio setting is set to always, and so as you're navigating all the screens, it's just like beeping like crazy at you, and to me, it drives me absolute ballistic. So I go into audio, oh, you just had it.
I just had it, right back here.
You want me to drive?
You wanna drive? Yeah, let's drive.
Let's see, it might be your computer, but let's see.
Might be my computer.
So what I like to do is under the general tab, I'll go down to the audio section, and it's kind of counterintuitive, but default is not the default setting. It's usually set to always. And that's why every time you roll the scroll wheel, it's just beeping like crazy and everything. So that's one of the first things I change is I change it from always to default. And then I also do the same with the haptic mode down here as well, because it's usually set to always, and I like to change it to default. That way, it's not always just constantly shaking every time I'm scrolling through the menu system or something like that.
One question, I noticed on Ethos, your programming for the computer is a replica, obviously, of the radio,
Yes.
unlike Companion TX. Is this a little bit more clunkier though, or is it just cool that you have one visual either for the radio or when you do it on the computer? Is it a little bit more?
It is a little bit clunkier because with OpenTX Simulator, you can actually have the radio plugged in and move the sticks around,
Yeah.
and they'll be registered by the simulator software or click the switches. With our system, it's not quite been implemented yet. So like to toggle the H switch, you would actually just hit H on the keyboard. And then to do the analog inputs like your sticks, you have to use the number keys. So it's not, it is a little more clunky than the OpenTX simulator, but since it mirrors the programming basically one-to-one, it does make programming your models a lot easier. So you can basically come in here, create a new model, and you can take that model file. If you see down at the bottom here, it'll say the file name of the model. You can copy that same model off of your computer directly onto the radio and then adjust it from there.
Anything else about system that we're doing here?
So the other couple things you would want to pay attention to on system is if you ever like get any kind of stick jitter or something like that, or you're not getting the full range throws of your pots, you'll want to come to the hardware area and just redo your analogs calibration. And it's what a lot of times people will do is they'll put everything to center, click calibrate, and then they start moving things around. But what you want to do is hit calibrate to start the calibration process first. Then, as it says here, center everything. So you want to make sure when it tells you to have everything centered, have all your pots and gimbals centered, and then you walk through the rest of the calibration steps here. So I'm just going to back out here because I'm not going to do that process on this.
Alright. We should also talk about switch setting.
I have a question in regards to when you get your radio brand new, you guys, they generate a radio ID number and it's like AB920.
That's
Yeah,
in the model.
we'll get to that during model setup.
Okay.
So, and then the other thing that you'll need to pay attention to on the system settings is if you're using any of our stabilizer receivers, our old stabilizer receivers, or our sensor setup, that's where you would do all the device configuration for your airspeed sensors, current sensors, basically everything there. For the newer stabilizer receivers, right now you do have to install what we call Lua scripts, but within the next month or so, that's all gonna be rolled into this section.
You point out the SXR on the screen up there, those two, SXR calibration. What you're gonna see is, it's gonna say SRX, so it'll be added in there as well. That is gonna be a huge deal, because asking people to load Lewis scripts has been a nightmare.
Yeah.
Yeah, so that way, it's gonna be one less step for everyone to have to work on.
Has that already been loaded on the 1.5?
It's gonna be a combination of Ethos 1.5 and also a combination of,
Cause I just got the AW, do I have to still load that one?
Yes, at the current time, you might still have to load the
Okay.
Lewis scripts, but, hopefully within about a month is when they're planning to
and
roll
this is
out.
where you will set up everything.
Okay.
It's in the device config. The other thing, no, sorry about that. Let's see, airspeed, gas suite, we're gonna have a new gas suite, remote NFC switch, we have that very on there. So a lot of these are sensors, they set up, exact servos, all the servos have telemetry as well, even the SBAC, so there's a lot to this.
Yeah, and the servos are fully programmable in the sense that you can change the sweep, so you can set them from 90-degree sweep, 120-degree sweep, or 180-degree sweep. You can mechanically center them by adjusting the programming of the servo itself, so you don't have to use sub-trims. You can change the pop gaps, you can change the friction, so you can really customize the way the servo performs for whatever you're doing. You can even also change the throw direction from clockwise to counterclockwise, basically, so you don't have to go in there and reverse channels. With Ethos, it's kind of like there's 4 different ways to do just about everything, and it's just a matter of knowing at what level, at what stage of the model setup and build is the best place to do that. So normally we always try to get our servos as mechanically centered as possible to reduce the amount of adjusting offsets and center trims and sub trims and all that as well. So that would be kind of at the higher level, by programming the servo directly.
Let's go to the next screen here.
Yes.
So, we'll just show the last thing, which is the info screen. Right. This is, as you can see, we have an X20S and at the very top. And it's running Ethos 1.5.0 release candidate 7. It's kind of update the Ethos suite
Yep.
on this PC.
The simulator.
The simulator, right, Ethos simulator. And it's working with the TDMX and it's showing the hardware and the firmware.
Now, these are all just simulated firmware versions because we're using the PC simulator. On your radio, the latest TD-ISRM firmware is 2.2.6. Now, a lot of people wonder what HW is. That's the hardware version. That's generally never gonna change because you're not changing the internal hardware of the RF module or the actual physical hardware of the receiver. The FW is your firmware version. That's what you're pushing your downloaded updates for.
So this indicates, receivers that you have programmed for every model
Yeah,
on the
so,
screen?
yeah, so
Wow.
for each model, when you have your model, registered and bound, you can come to this screen and you can bind up to 3 receivers for each model.
The receiver has to be plugged in and turned on.
Yeah, the receiver has to be plugged in and
oh.
turned on, and you'll see it.
Oh, so this doesn't show a receiver, yeah, it does. So every time you change a model, it's also gonna show all the information for each
Those
one of
other
the
receivers, like for this example, like I said, it's simulating,
Gotcha.
3 TDMXs, but on your radio, let's say you have a TDR10 and a TDMX bound up, it'll show the TDR10 and TDMX. You have another model, that has a TDR18 and a TDR10, it'll show those receivers when you load that model.
Can you go back up to the top of that really quick?
But that's only for Frsky receivers.
Correct.
It won't show the Spectrum or any others.
What I do when people say, I have an issue, I just ask them to photograph this right here. Cause if I ask them, do you have the latest update, they always say yes.
Quick question about updates.
I was wondering, I want to keep going through this, please hold off some of these questions.
Yeah, we're gonna have a Q&A kind
Okay.
of,
Yeah.
towards the last
Sorry,
part of
but yeah,
the thing,
I wanna keep
but
going.
we wanna roll through the
Yeah,
software overview.
this is just the hardware stuff, we wanna get into helping people set up the radio. And so we're going to the next portion of this, which is the models. See the airplane icon right there? You hit that, and that is, or you hit the MDL right there, it's the same thing. And so,
So there's two ways to navigate the system. You can do it using the touch buttons down here. You have your airplane, which is the model setup, the gear icon, which is your system setup, and then you can as well click the physical hardware buttons that are on the radio.
now, what we're gonna do is we're gonna go through setting up the model really quick. And this is, the best way to do this is to do a create new model. You see right there where it also says receive model? We went back through it, yeah. So you can, we showed this the other day, you can send and receive models from one transmitter to the other using Bluetooth. And then it goes like that, and we'll send it right, usually it works, doesn't give you a right error.
Yeah, well, with the simulator, we don't have a secondary one to
Yeah.
send it, so it just gives that as
We're gonna hit the big plus button where we can create a new model right there. Go to create model, and then airplane, right there, hit next. Now, this has changed, see those three little dots right there? This is important. Somebody found this and he didn't know what that meant. So the question is up above, are you using a stabilized, self-styled receiver from Frsky? And that was supposed to be no, but it was not very obvious. So I wrote into GitHub and I said, people are having a hard time with this because they're picking stabilized receivers when they don't have them and screwing up their models. So within about a month, we had that changed to no, I'm not, or something. It says no, I'm not. And then Cindy, you had something that you sent in on GitHub and it showed up in version, right?
When you custom color your theme, there was some colors that the text was not getting encoded, so it was hard to read some text.
Right.
And they fixed it within probably 2 weeks or less. Actually, no, they fixed it within a week, yeah.
Within a week. So yeah, that's the whole thing about these updates with Ethos. People are like, why are they doing so many so often? There are little things they're finding along the way and they're fixing them and making it better. All right, we're gonna hit next and we're gonna look at, so right now we have one channel playing. Let's have fun. The Hobby King has just released a Twin Otter. Let's set that playing up. I bet you, so he uses 2 channels for.
And there's 2 ways to navigate these scroll menus. You can click and drag them and try to drop it on 2 channels. You can also just click on it directly and it'll pop up another window that you can then go in and more easily select. Sometimes when I'm dragging these around, I try to drop it on what I want and I overshoot and I end up with 3 channels and so I have to go back again. So sometimes just clicking on it and letting that extra window pop up and selecting from that secondary pop-up is a little bit easier.
Right. So now, what this has is 2 channels for ailerons, and we're gonna use 2 channels for flaps. So we have flaps. It has traditional tail, and for fun, I'm gonna say that it has 2 elevators. And 1 rudder, okay. So what it's gonna give right now, it's giving an overview. It's showing you where everything's set up on, and just making sure you know where it's at, right? Then we hit next, and then right there, we're going to say that this is going to be, say TO for Twin Otter, or you can type it in.
Yeah.
All right,
Yeah.
screw up already, look at that.
I'm just gonna call it Twin Op.
Okay. And you can select a picture if we could, and go to next. Okay.
I keep double clicking.
I know, it's fast. All right, so where did I plug everything in at, Ben? Now that I had something flash up a second ago, but I don't understand where I plugged all my servos.
So the airplane icon is again, you're gonna be your model setup where you do everything specific to that one model. Under the mixer settings, it will have the mixes that you just basically assigned during that model creation step. It'll tell you which channels are your ailerons, your elevators, your twin throttle, your rudder, and the flaps that we assigned.
But flaps don't have something set up. Why is there a problem with it? It says no source, right?
Yeah, so the source is gonna be where, what switch or button which input button you're using on the radio system itself. So there's kind of 2 ways to do everything at least. You can click on flaps, click on edit like this, or you can just long click on flaps and it'll go right into the edit screen.
So then for the input, all you do is hit control, let's say control D on there. It's the same as hitting SD,
You don't have to hit control, just
just D.
yeah. So it's a little, sometimes the naming conventions are a little confusing because on the previous screen here, it says the source, but here they call it, or on the edit screen, they call it the input. It's basically the same thing. The source and the input are the same.
Hey, I'm gonna ask you a question. I see something looks like a hamburger there. Maybe not now, we'll talk about it. We're gonna talk about that for sure, right?
Yeah.
Okay.
So that's that 3 stacked bars icon.
It's called the hamburger, so we're gonna get into that.
Does this standardize what channels, each control surface goes on, like,
Yes.
in open
Otherwise,
source,
1 to 5.
you have the tier system, but this, channel, 1 is not throttle in this case, is it always?
AETR, always easy to remember,
Okay.
inline elevator throttle rudder.
And you can change the default channel order under the system area, under,
Got it.
sticks. And then here's the default channel order. You can also, this is where if you're flying European style, change it to mode 1. But now that's just changing it in the software. You still have to do hardware change for mode 1.
Which means move your back. Alright, so, let's hit the other thing I wanna point out, go back into the airplane, go back to mixes. Where's that little plus button in the top right there, what does that do?
We used to always tell people, click on the plus button, and they can never find it. It's in the top right here. They made the icon a little bit bigger, and that's for adding a new mix in. Let's say you have landing gear, or lights, or smoke, or something else that it's not a default mix that it assigns during the model setup state.
Oh, you said landing gear, let's set that up. I don't see landing gear on this list. I'm gonna write to you then and say there's no landing gear. What are you gonna tell me?
So, pretty much simple mixes like landing gear, you can use the free mix. That's the most versatile mix. It allows you basically to do all the setup of pretty much the curves, the expo, the weights, and the output of that mix.
Okay.
When you click on the free mix, it asks you where do you want to add it in the list. You can tell it either the first position, which is at the top of the list, the last position, which is bottom of the list, or after a specific mix in the list as well. So in this case, I just usually put everything to the last position.
Okay, now we have a source right there.
Let me just change it up. So first thing I always like to do is change the name on the mix, because a lot of times you'll go through the setup process, get to the end and assign it to your output, and then your output is gonna be named free mix, and then you have 4 outputs that are named free mix.
Right, before
and
you
it
go any
gets
further,
confusing.
just wanna point out, he's showing landing gear, cause there's no landing gear set up, so he's creating a free mix to set up landing gear. And now he gave it a name, now we're gonna select a source.
And see, previously on that, when we set up the flaps, it was called input, but now they call it source for the free mix. So usually you put that on this SS switch here.
Well, let's put on a 3-position switch, it's a good time to talk about hamburgers. Let's put on switch A.
Okay.
Okay, so we're putting on a 3-position switch. Now I got a couple choices. I can change switch A to a 2-position switch permanently in the hardware setup. In this model, I'm gonna set it up. You can see it's still a 3-position switch, right?
Yeah, so on the screen, I don't know if it shows up well up there.
The little hamburger right next, where see it says SA, and all the way to the left right there, it says there's a little hamburger. You click on that little hamburger.
How do you click on that hamburger with a radio?
Radio, right? So you put your finger on that.
I think you press and hold, right?
Yeah, so it's a long click, and you can do that 2 ways. You can either long click on the field itself directly, or I always have trouble, obviously, if you couldn't tell. I would just like to long press on the actual scroll wheel, and then that brings up the additional options for that field. In this case, it allows you to do negative, which is basically invert. So it will make it operate in the reverse position.
I have an easy way to explain this, because people get confused about this all the time. It means anything but this position. So I remember this from high school, where the gal told me, I'll date anyone but you. So, this is, what it means is that when switch A is active, it does one thing. And if anything other than switch A is active, it'll do something different.
Not.
What, okay, you explain it, Ben.
So, and for this particular case, it means it's actually inverting the switch function. So normally at top, you're gonna be negative 100, middle is gonna be 0, and bottom is gonna be positive 100. What negative means is that at top position, it's gonna be positive 100, middle will be 0, and then bottom will be negative 100. It just,
Basically invert.
it's basically the same as invert. I don't know why they call it different. Apparently, the dev wants to call things two
Oh, that's
different
right.
ways.
I'm getting confused.
Yeah.
Can you change
So-
that to where, just say low rate or high rate? Can you change that to where up is low rate or down is low rate?
Yes, and that's what Steve was alluding to earlier, where basically, on the weights here, I'll go ahead and edit it. And normally, everything pretty much defaults to always on. In this case, we're gonna say the switch A position, and we want it to be, in the up position will be the 100% rates, so high rates. I'm gonna back out, I'm gonna clone this, edit it, and say, when switch A is middle position, that will be my, mid rates, like 80%. I'm just throwing some numbers in here just that for some different stuff. And then you can add a third one as well for your low rates.
Have you already talked about what weights are?
We haven't got that far yet.
Okay.
Nobody knows what you're talking about.
Is this video gonna be on YouTube or
Yeah.
Oh, yeah.
Okay, cool.
And weights are the same thing as rates, what you're more familiar with your rates, your high rates, your mid rates, and your low rates. And so as you toggle through the different switch positions, you can see the graph as well reflects that it has less rate being output to that channel.
So let's get back out of here. Let's go back to, I wanna go back to that mixer screen, go back into all those canned mixes. I'm gonna point out a couple of the canned mixes, which I find to be kind of interesting. So the one I like to use is the aileron rudder mix. So the one right up at the top, right there, there we go. That one right there, you should put in the last position. What that does is, I have an actual airplane here to show this. When the plane is flying, when you make it a turn, what happens is that, typically what happens is the plane kind of turns outside of, here turn this on, okay. When a plane is making a turn, sometimes it's not the most graceful turn. And what you need to do is whatever up aileron, you wanna have the rudder kind of go into a little bit. So you can give it a percentage, so that right there at 20%, maybe give it a little bit higher, a little bit lower, depending on your particular plane. What that does, it gives what they call the controlled turn, and you get a smoother turn. So that's one of the, I think, one of the ones that you play with, it's very beneficial. Okay, next one is, another one up there. And,
Flaps to LED.
oh God, we get this all the time. So people will say, I put my flaps on, the plane balloons up, and then I have to save it and then bring it back down again. Is there some way to fix that? So right there, the flap to elevator is a perfect one to play with. Put it in last position, and you can input it, give it an input, you can have it always on. So usually
you put it with your flap switch as well, so SD.
There you go. And you can set a curve. The curve that comes with this, typically you don't want it to be something so radical, because you want it to work around the same speed as your flaps. There we go.
And actually, I'm gonna step back and say, most people will come in here and assign it to the same switch as their flap switch. But if you put slow down and slow up on your flaps, it's not gonna carry over to your flaps to ele mix. And you want your elevator mix to also have that same slow up, slow down as what you set for your flaps. So instead of using just the straight analog switch value, you can select the channel.
You can choose a flap channel. It doesn't matter which flap channel it is.
I keep trying to use the up-down arrows, and that doesn't work.
Let down mirror the speed.
Exactly, yeah. So it uses whatever you've done to the flaps, it's gonna use that same curve, that same slow up, slow down, to make the elevator also not just jump up or jump down.
In fact, it's a good time. Let's go back to the flaps. I wanna show them the slow up, slow down thing really quick. So the curves right there are getting, there's a certain amount of time. I typically like to give about 3.5 seconds.
So, and usually you want your slow down, you want your flaps to deploy slow, but you want them to come up faster because you don't want them to be. So I'm just gonna say slow up, and then the slow down will be 3.5.
Down is coming down, up is returning. I don't even slow up at 2 seconds. It's still a little fast for me, but a little slow for me. I usually use something like 1/2 second, 3/4 of a second.
Yeah.
But anyway, what we have here, can we show inside of the outputs what this looks like?
I'm gonna back out and go to the regular model setup area, and under the output screen, you can see your flaps one. And so instead of just jumping, and you can see that it's also, as we apply the flaps, it's also giving that,
Elevator
25%
compensation.
Elevator compensation.
Right.
Ben,
What-
does this act as a flight mode so that you could
This
adjust
is
the
not a flight mode,
elevator
this is on everything.
in flight, specific to, the flaps? Deploying flaps?
The way we showed it right now is just strictly based off the switch positions, but you can use this section, the flight mode section, and have your landing and takeoff different flight modes to control your different flap positions as well.
So that's totally independent then, so you just have to assign it as a switch that when you hit that switch, it's now becoming a flight mode, so it's additional step.
Exactly.
Right.
Okay.
There's still subs, yeah. Perfect, all right. All right.
Do you wanna show any of these other ones here?
I'm looking at them, there's a lot of these are specialized, butterflies for like gliders, air brakes for, turbine jets, typically you see those in. Wanna talk about offset at all, or is that something more complicated?
Most of the time you shouldn't need offset, so I'm gonna.
Let's just, okay, let's move on.
Yeah.
Moving on.
Offset's simple, it's just gonna offset a channel value based off of some other switch position.
Well, I got a question. If we're already set up ailerons, elevators, rudders, flaps, all these things, why are they here again?
Well, it just gives you the option to add them back in case you accidentally delete them or something like
You
that.
can also set them up for different flight modes, as Ron was just talking about, so you can have a separate, somebody had this idea, and I loved it, which is he has his rudder set up, so when his landing gear is down, his rudder moves the wheel on his plane, so he can steer with it. But when it goes up, the rudder changes, and it becomes a rudder, so it doesn't control the landing gear. And those are two different flight modes.
So, yeah, in this case, I'm gonna basically choose the F switch, which we assigned to the gear switch. So this would be, gear down, and then when it's active, and then you can have this output into a secondary, instead of your normal channel 4 rudder, it's gonna output to channel 10, and you can control your nose wheel steering from channel 10.
That is pretty insane. So the benefit of that is, the idea is that you don't have to like worry about it. The rudder turning inside of your plane as you're moving your rudder as you're flying. You can go from one to the other very quickly. Okay.
Is this simulator downloadable if you don't
It
have a
is.
radio yet, so that you can
Yes.
play with it to see if you're gonna like that platform?
Exactly,
Yeah.
so
Okay.
you can download the software, you don't even have to have a radio. Again, it is a little clunky to use, but, they're working on improving the ability to do your the simulated sticks from, another radio system, so you should be able to potentially use your current radio system, no matter what it is, to still at least simulate something within the radio,
Okay.
or within the software.
We've gone right now, we've shown you how to set the radio up, give you some ideas about that, we've got a model set up, we got some mixes, we talked about some of the can mixes. Let's set up the RF system, we wanna be able to bind your receiver to your transmitter.
So earlier you had asked about the registration ID. This is basically just a unique identifier. It's randomized for each radio, and that allows the radio and the receiver to have a two-way, basically binding phrase, so that the radio is only sending out packets destined for the receiver that it's registered to, and the receiver is only listening for packets that the radio that it was registered to is sending from.
So is it okay to use the same ID on different planes, or do you definitely wanna change the ID there for each specific plane?
You would leave it alone for across the board for all your models, because
Okay.
that can, if you change it plane to plane, you're gonna have to re-register and rebind every time, because it needs to be consistent for each radio.
Right.
So let's say you buy 2 radio systems and you wanna register and bind the same receivers easily, you can go to your first radio that you've already got models programmed on and set up on, write down the registration ID, and program your second radio to be the same registration ID, and then you can basically copy all your models over and not have to do the registration process.
Okay.
again. You can switch the models from one radio to another just by redoing the bind, which is put it into bind mode and power up the receiver or the model.
Got it.
So, people ask about this, you can, owner ID registration, you can change it before you bind any receivers. If you go in afterwards and start changing, you have to re-register and rebind all your receivers. So you give it a name. Oh, I know he's gonna, yeah, I like that name. Alright, so,
I'm gonna say Steve Sitton.
okay, perfect. Perfect, yeah, there we go. Now, registration and binding, people get confused about these things. What is a registration, what is a bind, and what does this all mean? So what we did, we gave this radio a name, it's called Steve Sim now, our transmitter's name. And what we do is, registration process is kind of like registering at a hotel. In the first few minutes of registering at a hotel, they want to know a couple of things about you. A, do you have money? B, what's your name, what's your address, what's your phone number, do you have a car, is it parked in our parking lot, those kinds of things. So this is where information is shared, right? They're not assigning a room to you yet, they're just getting down the basics of it. So we're going through the registration process right now. As you can see, the registration process, what it's doing is it's sharing the name Steve Sim. That's gonna be almost like branded onto the receiver. And the receiver in return is sending information back about what it is. It said it was an Archer receiver, and we are.
And the UID. So when you're connecting multiple receivers, so you want to make sure to increment the UID. For the first receiver will be 1, second receiver 2, third receiver 3, because you can get the telemetry coming back from all 3 receivers, and that's how the radio separates which receiver it's getting the telemetry data.
Right, so the thing is that this registration process, we hold down what was once known as the bind key, the bind button, and you power on the receiver. First you have to do is tell the transmit, you hit the registration button right there. Then as you power on your receiver and hold down the registration button, you'll get this pop up and it will give the information, it'll say registration okay. Once that's done, you don't have to do it again. So everything after this is, when you bind, all you have to do is hit bind, plug it in, and it will the transmitter the receiver says, I'm here, the transmitter said, I remember you. Are you on this model? And it says, yeah, okay, I'm gonna assign you to that model. That's basically what the process is about.
So, basically what I'm just showing here is that if you have a receiver bound and you're like, oh no, I didn't want that to be my primary receiver, you can come in here and reset the bind on each of them, and you don't need to re-register because you've already done the registration process on once. You can just shuffle them around by doing the bind process.
Now, I'm trying to remember in the simulator, does it show once it's done there, can you go in there and look at the options? Options, yep, there it is.
I don't think it will. I don't.
Yeah, okay.
Oh, actually, it does.
Wow,
They fixed that.
they fixed that. This is cool, look at this. What we did, now, this is some stuff that people get confused about all the time. Telemetry is off, you can turn telemetry on, we usually turn it on in the telemetry section. This thing which says telemetry 25 milliwatts, what that means is that that's actually turning the power down. So there are a few receivers, notably the high-tech HS645NG, that starts to jitter a bit. It does not like 900 megahertz telemetry. So what we do is we turn it down to 25 milliwatts in that particular case, right? You do not want to turn that on by default because you're putting out less telemetry power. So it's the last thing you should work on before you.
And just to touch on what high PWM speed, we get asked about that a lot. If you're using any analog servos, do not turn on high PWM speed. It's only for digital servos. If you're running all digital servos, you can turn on high PWM speed, and that just basically increases the data transmission rate that it talks of the digital servos with.
Okay, the telemetry port by default is F port, but you can change it to S port. These are S ports and older. That was our first telemetry.
So another thing we get asked quite a lot about is S-Bus and SmartPort and F-Bus and what the difference is between them. So S-Bus is your control link, your control channels only. So your 16 channels of control. It's from the radio to the receiver only. SmartPort was telemetry data, so it's bi-directional. The radio is telling the receiver stuff, the receiver is sending data back about its status. With F-Bus, it combines both S-Bus and SmartPort into a single line, so both your control link and your telemetry data is one wire connection and goes back and forth.
To reiterate, S-Bus is 3 cables. It's the 3 cables, so you've got power, ground, and signal. And then SmartPort was a 4th one that went in that had to go into another channel. With F-Bus, it's just on one 3 cable circle wire.
And then also with most of the modern receivers we have, the ACCST receivers do not support the pin reconfiguration, and some of the newer receivers have a little bit limited options, but you can come in here and say, for example, on pin 1, output S-Bus. So I'll scroll down to the bottom, see if it has the option here. No, they don't have it in the simulator. But some receivers will allow you to put S-Bus out on one of the pins or S-Bus in. S-Bus in is used for receiver redundancy, so you would have S-Bus coming out of one receiver and S-Bus going into another receiver. So when you have your satellite receiver set up, that's how you connect them, is through pin 1.
That's handled. All right, let's move on to, let's go into the next section here. Range check. That is highly important. 2 things, fail-safe range check. We should talk. So range check, what it's doing right now is you turn this on, what happens is the transmitter puts out 1/30 of the power. And then what you're supposed to do is move away. You put your plane up about 5 feet off the ground, and you move away from it, and you should have your transmitter pointing towards your plane. I usually say you get about 200 feet on 2.4 gigahertz. That's a pretty good sign that you have very good range. You want to make sure that the 900 megahertz is still going solid. You said that one more time in the range check.
Yeah, so at 200 feet times 30 for 1/30th the power, that's about 6,000 feet, which is about a mile.
So that looks good, yeah, and then.
And failsafe is always gonna default to being not set because it's just the safest option. Fail-safe is one of those tricky things where there's different mentalities of how you wanna set your fail-safe. Some people want, or most people are used to, having just a receiver hold. But hold, if you go into fail-safe, is obviously could potentially crash your airplane. Some people using stabilized receivers try to have it go into self-level mode with low to mid throttle and some right rudder to hopefully get it to spin down and land pretty flat. Other people say the safest thing is to just have it send no pulses and just get the plane on the ground as quickly as possible, regardless of what happens. So there's a few different approaches to setting fail-safe depending on, what kind of plane you're flying and how safe the plane is to either continue flying when you have no control, or whether the safest option is just to let it go into the ground.
Alright, let's get out of here. Alright. People ask about, if we should talk about outputs or go to trims.
Whichever one you wanna go to first.
Alright, so let's go to outputs. So this is outputs. Now it's gonna be hard to do on a simulator. Typically, when you look on the radio, when you move the sticks around, you'll see the ailerons move and everything else.
Yeah.
People ask about where do I set my sub trims, where do I set, how would I do that? How would I set the sub trims on aileron 1?
So under the output screen, you just click on the aileron 1. It gives you the option for your center sub trim, your minimum, maximum. You can also do your servo direction reversing here as well. So if you have a control surface that's not moving the right way, this is the best place to really adjust that.
And then with the minimum and maximums, like you can set that so that it never, for example, if it's a flop servo, if it goes to a certain point and it starts to buzz, you can back it down here so it never gets to that point in the first place.
Then generally that's gonna be the first thing you set up before you start programming in your weights and your rates. A lot of people will start to dial in the weights and the rates based off of the buzzing of the servos. But generally you wanna actually set at 100% rate, the minimum and maximum, so that that's the furthest that the servo will travel. And then look at your manual, if it comes with the manual, to see what the recommended deflection degrees or measurements are for your rates, so that you can get the proper amount of throw for high or low rates.
That's the same thing as travel in open source?
Yes.
Okay.
Okay, and then, also, we should show, this is I think the most beautiful parts of it, where it says direction, normal or reverse, now it says reverse, it used to say invert, people didn't know what that meant. That's how you reverse your servos.
And here, it does also allow you to program in different slow up, slow down, and curves as well under the outputs, but most of that is better done at the mixer level.
Yeah. So that, let's go to trims. You can see, now the steps where it says fine, I have people tell me like, when you sit there and you're setting the trims and it's making sounds where after a certain point it gets so high only dogs can hear it, that means that you want to change fine to something else. First thing I do is change it to coarse.
I usually go to medium first and then.
Of course you do.
Yeah, I like to go in steps.
No, coarse. Okay.
And then range is how much trim it will allow you to apply to that specific control surface.
And you see where it says move trim to sub trim right there? Can you explain that?
So we always have a lot of people that would trim out the radio and go, okay, now I want it to be centered. So that's what the move trim to sub trim does basically. Is it sets whatever trim you've manually set during flying onto that output sub trim that you saw on this previous screen.
In OpenTX, you do that in the output screen where you hit it once and it does it for all the channels. According to this, you have to do it for each individual channel or servo.
No, it does it all at once.
So there is a way to move them all if I remember right, it's a long press, no. There's a way to get it to move all, I can't remember what it is.
We'll get back to you, Ron.
Yeah. Let me see, I think it's what you have to do is click and hold the middle button while you click that, which I can't do on the simulator because there's only one mouse pad.
But it's possible, okay.
Yeah, I know it's possible because somebody else asked that same question and there's a way to do it.
Okay, let's go into the timers really quick. This is something, it's not gonna spend too much time in here. This is how you set up your timers. We should go in there and go into edit. We're gonna talk about, first of all, you wanna give it a name. I'll pop down.
So most people wanna have a flight timer, standard, your standard flight timer, countdown from, you can have it count up or down, whichever you prefer.
You wanna give it 7 minutes or 8 minutes right there, you can just change it there.
It's not, this is gonna be good.
It's hard to do on the simulator, but typically it's very easy to do on the radio. We'll show you that later on. The start condition is the thing that gets it to move.
So let's say the gear up position, so that, you take off, you put your gear up, it'll start the flight timer.
And then stop condition is default or custom, usually just the default.
Default will let it keep running, so as you can see, right now I have the gear up. And so it's been running, since we had the countdown timer start at 000, it's already gone over the timer, and started counting into the negative.
The one thing, okay, so we'll go to this persistent, there's a reset, so we have a reset where you can have it, so when you hit the reset, whichever button it is, or whichever condition, it will bring it all back to 0. You can add a new audio option, that's pretty cool, okay. The one thing I wanna get into before people fall asleep, is this is something that we get all the time. We get these, every once in a while, we get somebody who writes in, hey, I had my plane up and it crashed. And it rolled to the left and it rolled to the right, and we're supposed to identify that. And it's the first thing we ask them is, do you have telemetry logs on? And that is the number one thing that we look for. This is probably one of the most important things to take away from today, is how to turn on those telemetry log recording.
And it's not under telemetry as what most people would think. What you actually do is go to your special functions area, add a new special function, and for your action, it's going to say write logs. And then you also have to enable it. Everything defaults to disable for the most part.
See that little red light at the top there? So you get a switch to turn it on. So typically what I do is when I turn off my throttle lock,
It's not going red.
it was on before, but.
Yeah, it just flashed on it for a second. So normally when you have the active condition is met, and as you can see, the special function is shown green, meaning it's active, and the write logs are writing. This little icon up in the top right corner is going to show red, so that you know that it's recording the flight logs. This is very important because it gives you it not just logs the telemetry, but it also logs all your switch positions, your analog stick positions, and everything else, so you can kind of read back through the flight and see what's happening with the model.
And there is where it says write interval 250 milliseconds, 100 milliseconds is a tenth of a second, so that's a quarter of a second, or it's writing a log file 4 times a second. To me, that's pretty good. Some people want it, sometimes I put it to 1,000 milliseconds or once a second. The less data you get, if your plane's flying okay, you're not having any problems, that's usually pretty fine. If you're really suspect of something, you can set it to 50 milliseconds. That's a pretty fast rewrite, and if you're using something like X20s, I would suggest that you replace the memory card with something that can write a lot faster. The new radios we have, like the X20 RS, have very fast memory, so you can have it 50 milliseconds. It's just gonna make larger files. However, these files are not very big. The text files.
If you click on global there, will that automatically set it up for all of the planes that you've already created, or is that something you have to go in and redo for each one?
Nope, that's exactly what it'll do, is it'll set it as a global function, so you don't have to do this on each and every, model that you set up.
Even if
Yeah.
it's already been even if you have models created?
But that's a good question, because a lot of times people will go, well, why can't I make it global? Well, if you use any condition that is a logic condition for the active condition, then the logic switches are not global. So if you don't have a global logic switch, you won't be able to have a global special function. So for example, you could set a logic switch up that is whatever condition here, let's say logging, and you want that to be switch F at max. And then when you go back to your special function and use that logic switch for the active condition, see, it forces off the global option. So sometimes if that's ever disabled like that, it's because you're using a logic switch condition that is a per model thing. That's why it can't be set to global.
But if you wanna use one switch forever, that's the best way to get it done. I highly recommend it. Alright, since we touched on telemetry really quick, but we didn't show how to turn it on, go into the telemetry screen.
So after you register and bind a receiver, this is usually the first step that I do, is go to the telemetry page, and right now there are no sensors being displayed. You click on discover new sensors, and that's gonna populate with all the sensors that are available that you have hooked up to your receiver or through your redundancy box system, and shows you the RSSI for both 2.4 and 900 and the VFR.
VFR stands for valid frame rates. I'm not gonna get into too deeply, but essentially that's link quality, and that is to me the most important thing. I don't really care too much about RSSI. The VFR is the only thing I care about when I wanna know how much signal I have. In fact, we could probably set up a switch so I can play a value, right?
Yeah, so once you have the telemetry sensors discovered, back under the special function screen, you can add another special function that will be play audio, and then you can scroll down a little bit. Actually, let me go ahead and just enable it, and just set it to A, that's fine. And add a new line, play value instead of play file, and you can tell it to use one of these telemetry values such as RSSI.
I would use valid frame rates.
Now, with VFR and RSSI, it's helpful to know what your current VFR is, but a lot of times you want to know what's the lowest that it got. What's the lowest signal strength, or what's the lowest? As you can see, there's the hamburger icon again. So when you long click it, it brings up more options. Let me do this again. Get it to go. There it is. And now you can choose your minimum. Instead of invert, it gives you different options here. So in this case, it would play the value of your minimum VFR for that flight. So you can know, okay, if I hit a low spike or something, maybe I should bring it in and see what's going on. Instead of seeing what your current VFR is, you can see what the minimum value was.
As long as we're doing that, the special functions do a lot of other things. You can do things like you can turn off in Ethos 1.5, you can turn off the screen so you can't touch it. Cindy was mentioning another brand had problems with rain, it was shorting out the screen, so you can lock the touchscreen as you're flying your plane, for example. We haven't had any issues with that, but if you want to be double, triple sure, if you're not gonna be doing anything, you can turn that on. One thing I wanted to show was the black box function, because we've never talked about this.
1 second, I just locked myself out of the touchscreen, so let me delete. I should not have enabled that, it's, let's go back.
Oh, wow.
It locked the keys too?
It locked the touchscreen. Awesome.
Hey, Ben, you better call tech support.
Brian's not awake yet.
You know anyone good?
Restart the software, reset.
Let's see if I can get this to scroll over.
Warning, warning, Will Robinson. Danger, danger.
Lesson learned, never lock your screen.
So.
It's so good, it locks the touchscreen permanently.
The suggestion there would be, make sure you set the active condition
To a switch.
away from always on
To a
to
switch.
whatever you want your switch to be before you enable the lock touchscreen. With the radio, it'd be easier to navigate around, it's just,
You shall not recover.
with Steve's laptop, it's difficult to, let's see if I can get it to do anything here.
This is on a model, right?
Yeah, it's on a model.
It's creating a model.
That's what I'm trying to do right now. And it's just, your laptop is not that good.
Oh, come on, it's an idea.
Alright.
Throttle not idle,
There we
switch
go.
warning.
Oh, that's not gonna work either because all I did was clone that model.
Why don't you select another model?
That's what I was trying to do earlier. It's just,
The middle one is a tab. On the last page, that page down is a tab.
yeah, what do you want to do?
So you can go to model select, okay, long press on MDL, long press on MDL, hold it.
Yeah.
And that should go into a model select. Alright,
Yeah, your simulator is not working that well.
I need that
That's
next
not
simulator
fine.
anyways.
Last
Last thing,
select. Let me see if I can get it onto a different model here.
you can use the tab button, so the page up, page down is tab, don't clone it.
Try the arrow keys.
Oh, here we go, alright.
It's that current model, yeah.
Yeah, arrow
Save
keys.
not set,
won't
switch
work.
warning.
Alright, now we're in a good model.
Alright, so we have to go back into, we have to register a receiver really quick and bind it.
It's still, it's still got the touchscreen locked up.
Alright.
Okay, let me do something real quick. This will just take a minute.
We're gonna get a radio out. By the way, who flies X-20X here? Alright, I don't have a few, here we go. Those are from, it's a cool little feature. So, we're gonna set up a new, we're gonna register and bind. Control module. On. There he goes, so it goes through the process. Register. As soon as you hold registration button in, after you hit register, plug the battery in. Says registration okay, go to bind. Okay. Click on that again. And flight data recorder, that's the black box. So this is there, and this is really freaking cool. At the end of your flight, you can go back and look at everything. You can see, it gives you basic, there's a lot more information when the flight's over as far as, it would show battery voltage, minimum and maximums.
And this is probably more important than telemetry logging, because this is gonna tell you specifically if you've had a brownout detection or some other issue with your RX battery voltage, or a lot more in-depth detail. Now, this does reset at power on, so if you do have any, call outs like signal, low signal or something, you always wanna check the flight data record before you power your plane.
Can you write it to an SD card before you
The
do
very
it?
bottom.
Yes, at the very bottom, you can save this data to a file. So it'll tell you if the board drew too much current, you can save the file.
And then send it back.
Yeah.
Alright,
So it won't automatically do it, you have to go and,
Yeah, that's one of the suggestions I've pushed up the chain, is that basically it should automatically save the file if any of those default, values have changed. So if it changes from an okay to a fail state or something like that, it should automatically save the file. I don't know when they'll implement that,